Welcome back to our Community Medicine Revision series. Today's focus is epidemiological study designs with a deep dive on case control and cohort studies. Dr. Joshi, could you start us off with why these two designs matter so much for exams and practice?
They are the backbone of analytical epidemiology. Both designs help us assess associations between an exposure and an outcome, and, crucially, the strength of that association. Done well, each can move us closer to causal inference and guide prevention and policy.
Great. Let's go step by step. First, what exactly is a case control study?
In a case control study, we begin with people who already have the disease, cases, and those who do not, controls. We look back to compare prior exposure histories between the two groups. Because the underlying population at risk is not fully enumerated, we estimate association using the odds ratio, or OR.
And a cohort study?
A cohort study starts with people who are disease-free but differ in exposure status. We follow them forward in time to compare the incidence of the outcome. Here, we typically use relative risk, or RR, derived from incidence in exposed versus unexposed groups. We also use attributable risk or population attributable risk there. Cohort designs can be prospective, retrospective, historical, or a combination of both.
Pause and recall. Which design starts with disease status and which starts with exposure?
Exactly. Case control begins with outcome status. Cohort begins with exposure. Think effect to cause for case control and cause to effect for cohort.
Let's add a short vignette. A district hospital flags a cluster of aggressive liver cancer in young adults. Rare and alarming. Funds are limited, answers needed quickly. Which design fits best and why?
That scenario screams case control. When diseases are rare or resources limited, case control studies are faster and cheaper. You can recruit all cases and a suitable control group, then look backward for exposures, say aflatoxin-contaminated food or industrial solvents. The OR quantifies the association.
Speaking of OR, students often stumble on 2x2 tables. Could you give the exam-friendly gist?
Certainly. Arrange exposure across rows and disease down columns, and the data as A, B, C, D in Z pattern. The odds ratio is AD upon BC, and in well-conducted case control studies, the OR approximates the RR when the disease is uncommon. Do not quote both OR and RR for the same design. Select the appropriate one.
In a case control study, which effect measure do you report?
The OR, odds ratio. In a cohort, the RR, relative risk based on incidence.
Now a cohort vignette. A tea estate wants to know whether chronic pesticide exposure among sprayers increases new onset wheeze over 2 years. What would you plan?
A prospective cohort. Define exposed sprayers and unexposed workers, exclude anyone with pre-existing wheeze, measure baseline confounders, then follow both cohorts comparably. After follow-up, compute incidence in each group, then the RR, and adjust for confounding. Keep loss to follow-up minimal.
Let's compare the two designs the way examiners like, by purpose, feasibility, measures and major pitfalls.
Purpose. Both test associations. Feasibility-wise, case control is quicker and cheaper, ideal for rare outcomes or long latency. Cohort is stronger for temporality and can directly yield incidence. Measures-wise, case control uses OR, cohort uses RR. Bias-wise, case control risks recall and selection bias. Cohort risks loss to follow-up and misclassification over time. Temporality is best established in cohort studies.
In bias, how would you minimize recall bias in case control?
Use standardized blinded interview protocols, validate exposures with records when possible, and select controls from similar diagnostic settings to ensure comparable workups. Also, beware overmatching. Do not match on variables that might lie on the causal pathway, or you could mask the very effect you seek.
How would you pick controls so they represent the exposure distribution in the source population?
Controls should be sampled from the same source population that gave rise to the cases, often the same hospitals and time window. so that if they had developed the disease, they would have been captured as cases.
Nested designs pop up in vivas. Could you demystify the nested case control and the case cohort twist?
Start with a defined cohort with baseline data and stored samples. As outcomes occur, each case is matched to one or more controls from within the cohort, efficient for costly assays. In a case cohort, controls are selected at baseline regardless of future outcome. Some may later become cases. Both designs save time and money while preserving many cohort advantages.
Let's bring in directionality and timing. Many students confuse retrospective cohort with case control.
In a retrospective cohort, you still classify participants by past exposure and then move forward to ascertain outcomes from records. Direction of inquiry remains from exposure to outcome. In case control, direction is from outcome back to exposure. Ambidirectional cohorts blend both.
Exam-style application question. State one situation where a cohort is clearly superior.
When establishing temporality is essential, say, evaluating whether a new occupational exposure precedes incident asthma, or when measuring multiple outcomes of a single exposure. A well-designed cohort approximates the experimental model and overcomes several case control limitations.
Another quick scenario. You're investigating the link between prenatal exposure to a synthetic hormone and a rare cancer in adolescent girls. Which design helped detect that historically?
A case control study, matching on birth hospital and date, famously identified the diethylstilbestrol signal by comparing prior exposure histories of cases and controls.
For calculations, what should students remember about laying out data and choosing the right statistic?
Keep a clean 2x2. Exposure on the left, disease across the top. For cohort designs, compute incidence and RR. For case control, compute the OR. Do not mix them. If you are using software, ensure you request OR for case control and RR for cohort, as examiners like that clarity.
Which design allows multiple exposures to be assessed for one outcome and which allows multiple outcomes from one exposure?
Case control is great for many exposures and one outcome. Cohort is ideal for many outcomes from one exposure.
Could you outline, briefly, the steps to plan a solid cohort study for the exam?
Start with a clear question. Define exposure, outcome, and confounders. Set exclusion criteria. Define the source and study population. Calculate sample size with type 1 and type 2 error considerations. Assemble exposed and comparison cohorts. Ensure comparable follow-up. Minimize loss and crossover, and then analyze incidence, RR, and adjust for confounding.
And if time or budget is tight in a cohort?
Consider a nested case control to test hypotheses efficiently, especially when exposures require expensive assays.
Before we wrap, could you give a crisp compare and contrast summary students can reproduce in theory answers?
Certainly. For case control, start with disease, look back to exposure. Faster and cheaper, ideal for rare diseases. Key measure OR. Main biases, recall and selection, temporality weaker. For cohort, start with exposure, follow to disease. Stronger for temporality, yields, incidence and RR, good for rare exposures and multiple outcomes. Main challenges, loss to follow-up and cost. Overall, a well-designed cohort is a powerful observational design.
Final self-check. If an examiner asks you to justify your chosen design in 2 lines, what will you say?
I chose a case control because the outcome is rare and I need a rapid economic assessment using OR to estimate association. Or, I chose a cohort to establish temporality, compute incidence in RR, and evaluate multiple outcomes from a single exposure.
That's a wrap. Pause and recall the big 3. Direction of inquiry, feasibility, and the correct measure of effect. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. This was exactly the exam-oriented clarity we needed.